Kids, we're moving out of the Native American unit. It was long, but I think you'll enjoy it, and I'm really looking forward for those of you that are going to go on the trip. I'm going to ask for one final time today, and this will be absolutely it. We have Garrett, Santos, Caleb, Ben that are not going to go on the trip. And Alex and Chance. One last opportunity. If any of you want to change your mind, because I am going to book motel rooms as soon as we're done. Anybody change their mind? Okay, moving on. Okay, we're going to talk about politics in the United States from 1876 to 1892. It's kind of an interesting period of time after the Grant presidency, which was full of scandal. And so our first subtopic is going to be the election of 1876. And this actually occurred, when is an election of 1876, when is the election usually? What time of the year? November. So what has happened prior to this election? Custer has been wiped out to a man. Okay? Now, because of all the scandals during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant, anybody remember what party he represented? He was a Democrat. So the Democratic Party, no, you're right. He was a Republican. Because of the scandal during the Republican-laden presidency of Grant, the Democrats were pretty confident that they would win the election of 1876. Grant had served his term as president, and he had had some problems, including his own brother being involved in a scandal that Custer testified in. And so the Democrats were looking pretty confident that they would win this election because the Republicans had an administration full of scandal. So the Democratic candidate for president in the election of 1876 was Governor Samuel J. Tilden of New York, who's on your ID sheet. Okay?
Wasn't he, we learned about him before, right?
No, not Samuel J. Tilden, no. You might have wrote a biography on him, somebody might have.
Oh, I did.
Yeah. So, the Democrats chose Governor Samuel J. Tilden of New York as their presidential candidate. That was the Democrats. Remember, they're confident of victory here because of all the scandals during the Grant administration. The Republicans countered with Governor Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio as their candidate. So in this election, the Democrats are going to run Governor Samuel J. Tilden of New York as their presidential candidate, and the Republicans are going to counter with Governor Rutherford B. Hayes of Ohio as their candidate. So you have two governors in pretty popular states in the Union that are running for the presidency. And both of these presidential candidates were wealthy. They had a lot of money, and they also were associated with a lot of money. They were associated with industrialists and business groups, so they had the right connections. Okay? So both of these candidates were wealthy. They had the right connections. They were associated with industrialists, people that find ways to make money. They're also very in touch with business groups, so they're both very wealthy individuals. Now, who has the advantage in this between the two candidates, do you think? The Democratic one. Governor Tilden has the advantage because he's running against a political party, as we mentioned, that was full of scandal prior. Okay? Now, this was a very interesting election. Very interesting. One like we've never had. When the votes were cast, Tilden actually had 250,000 more popular votes than Hayes. Okay, he had 250,000 more popular votes than Hayes. Now, what have I told you about political elections? Popular votes in a dollar will buy you a pop in the pop machine, because what counts in an election? Electoral votes. And you have to have 2/3 majority to get those. And what happens, you should know this. My seniors didn't know this today. What happened to Andrew Jackson one time when he ran and he did not get the 2/3 majority of electoral votes? Where did that go to? Where did the decision go to?
Oh, yeah.
Went into the House. And remember, Henry Clay got disqualified because he was the third leading vote getter, and he pushed for Adams and then pointed to his cabinet. Okay, so it can happen. Well, when the electoral vote came out, Governor Tilden had 184 compared to Hayes's 165. So Tilden wins both the popular vote and the electoral vote in this election. Wins them both. Okay? Wins them both. Problem is, he's one vote short of the two-thirds. One vote short of the two-thirds majority. One vote. Okay? Now what would normally happen when they're one vote short? Or any, vote short?
They revote.
No, I just said that. What do they do?
Go to the House.
Go to the House. Well, this even got crazier. Because again, ordinarily when no president gets two-thirds majority, it goes to the House and they decide. Well, when they really start paying attention, 4 states sent in 2 sets of returns. In other words, they sent their returns in twice. Okay? So 4 states sent in 2 sets of returns for the election. The states were South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, and Oregon. Those 4 states didn't send in 1 set of returns, they sent in 2. So now you got a mess, right? Because you don't really know of those 2 sets of returns how many went to which person. So in the election, 4 states, South Carolina, Florida, Louisiana, and Oregon, each sent in 2 sets of returns. Now it just happened that those 4 states made up 20 electoral votes. Okay, there were 20 electoral votes in those 4 states. So what are they going to have to do? What are they going to have to do here? Okay, who needs 1 vote of those 20 that are up in the air now? Tilden needs 1. Hayes needed all 20 to win. Okay, so how are they going to settle this? What are they going to do? What are they going to have to do? They're going to have to do a
They're gonna duel.
recount. Okay? So they send in 2 sets of returns. So each of these states is going to have somebody within the state recount all those votes and send in only 1 set of returns. And then the electoral votes that go with those states would go to the persons. Who has the huge advantage here? Tilden, he only needs 1. In other words, Hayes would have to carry all 4 of these states after the recount to win. Tilden only would have to probably carry 1 state because he only needed 1 electoral vote. So they had to count them all. Now, you've got to have somebody you trust count them. So what Congress did is they created what was called the Electoral Commission, which is not on your sheet, but I'll put it up here. They created the Electoral Commission. What's another name for a commission? Anybody know? A committee. Okay, the Warren Commission was actually a committee. So, Electoral Commission was established by Congress, and they were going to put people they trusted on the committee to do what? Count the votes. So, in order to break the deadlock, Congress created an Electoral Commission that consisted of 15 members. What type of people do you think? There were 3 different types of people that were on this commission. Don't get that crazy. So who got picked to count these votes? What type of people? No. What? No. Politically. No. Governors is kind of close.
The House.
Senators. They picked 5 senators. Now, what would be important among those 5 senators when you picked them? What would be you'd have to take into consideration?
Different states.
No. Different parties. So these 5 senators that were picked, 3 were Republican and 2 were Democrat. Okay? Now we'll see if they even this out. Okay? So there's 15 members, 5 of them are going to be senators. Of those 5 senators picked, 3 were Republicans and 2 were Democrats. So who's at the disadvantage at this point? Okay. Who else might they pick besides senators?
The House.
Members of the House. There were 5 members of the House picked also. How many Republicans do you think were picked? 2. And how many Democrats? 3, because they make it even, right? So, they picked 5 United States representatives, or congressmen they call them. 5 senators, 5 members of the House. And the 5 members of the House were just the opposite. There were 2 Republicans and 3 Democrats. What other group might you pick that's pretty powerful in politics? It's got to be a group that has more than one person, like the Senate has many people, the House has many people. This group doesn't have a lot of people, but they have some influential people. Who else might you pick? What's another big high position in our government that has more than one person involved?
Oh, what is
No. Good guess.
it?
Yeah, you're going to say Supreme Court. Very good. They picked 5 Supreme Court justices. Now, what are they going to have to do? We got kind of a weird deal here because it's even, so what are they going to do? They're going to pick 5, and 2 of those justices are going to be Republicans, and 2 are going to be Democrats. What's the other one going to have to be? Neutral, very good, or non-partisan. Okay? So non-partisan. So they picked 5. I don't spell that real well. Okay, non-partisan. Those are people that are not Democrats or Republicans. They're independent. So they picked 5 senators, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 5 members of the House, 2 Republicans, 3 Democrats, and 5 Supreme Court justices, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 non-partisan. So did they have an even representation? Perfect. Should be an easy deal. Well, the one guy that was the non-partisan member of the commission, he was a Supreme Court justice, and his name was David Davis, which is on your ID sheet. He was the non-partisan Supreme Court justice that was on the Electoral Commission. And what happens before they begin the process of counting these votes, he resigned from the Justice Department because he was elected to the United States Senate. So now you've got to replace that person. And how you got to find somebody else that's nonpartisan, which they couldn't do. So what do you think they did?
They get 14 people?
No, you think that this is a weird deal. They decided, the Democrats and Republicans got together and made a deal. Okay, we got a problem here. We need to get this solved. We'll make a deal. So they actually made a deal between the 2 parties. They agreed to this. Here was the deal. Somebody had to be chosen as president. And in return for that, somebody was going to have to get something else. Right? That's how a bargain's put together. So we know, you ever heard of Samuel J. Tilden before today? Have you ever heard of Rutherford B. Hayes before today? So obviously Rutherford B. Hayes was basically given the presidency in exchange for these 3 things. So the Democrats let the Republican candidate, Rutherford B. Hayes, be president in exchange for these 3 things. And these 3 things would have to benefit what? Democrats. And where do most of the Democrats live?
In north.
South. Okay, so we're going to see what happens. So the Democrats accepted Rutherford B. Hayes as president in exchange for these 3 things. 1, this is 1876. We still had federal troops located in the South. So the first thing that the Democrats wanted in exchange for Rutherford B. Hayes being elected president, or given the presidency, is they wanted all Union troops, or federal troops, withdrawn from the South. Because they didn't like the presence of still having Union troops in the South. So all federal troops, they call them federal now because it was after the Civil War. In essence, they were the old Union troops from the Civil War. They were withdrawn from the South. So no longer were there any Northern troop influence in the South. What else do you think Hayes would have to agree to do? What's he going to put together here pretty quick? Somebody mentioned it as part of maybe somebody that was on the commission. What's he going to put together? What's the president put together when he's elected? Puts together a cabinet. So what's he going to guarantee the South? That he's going to try to balance and put some Democrats in his cabinet. Okay, so he agrees. The second part of that is Hayes would appoint his fair share of Southerners or Democrats into his cabinet. Okay, that was the second bargain. President Hayes would appoint a fair share of Southerners into his cabinet. Now, think about the South after the Civil War. What kind of shape were they in? Bad. What might be something the South really would want done across the South but couldn't afford to do it?
Railroads.
Wanted a railroad. So the third agreement was that the federal government would build a railroad at their expense across the South. So, Rutherford B. Hayes was given the presidency in exchange for 1, all federal troops located in the South would be withdrawn. 2, President Hayes would appoint a fair share of Southerners into his presidential cabinet. And 3, the North would agree to build and finance a railroad across the South. Those were the 3 things. Martin probably thought of it. Because of this agreement, Rutherford B. Hayes would become president despite the fact that his opponent received more popular vote and more electoral vote than he did. First time in history.
So did he
that ever happened.
Did the Republicans actually do this stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, they did. So, Rutherford B. Hayes now becomes your next president of the United States.
Is that the only precedent that happens to?
This particular deal, but we have some other weird elections. Now, I'm going to tell you some notes on President Hayes. I want you to write them down, just some kind of neat things. President Hayes was his wife was the first lady that had earned a college education. President Hayes' wife was the first lady, and you all know the first lady is the president's wife.
I think I did a deal on this.
Yeah, you might have.
I did it.
That had earned a college education.
Yeah.
So the first lady, Mrs. Hayes, is the first lady in the history of our country that has a college education. Anybody know how many children the president and his wife had?
6.
8.
I was close.
They had 8. So President Hayes and his wife had 8 children. What great university did President Hayes help found?
Yale.
No, think where he's from.
Brown. Oxford.
Where's he from? He's the governor of what? What great university he helped found? Ohio State University. Yep. So he helped very much, had big influence in founding and starting Ohio State University. He'd be very proud of the national football champions, wouldn't he? Anybody know what his wife was referred to when she was in the White House? It was a kind of a derogatory name, but it had a purpose. What did they call her? Her name was Lucy Hayes. What did they call her? Lemonade Lucy. Why would they call her?
He said she made lemonade a lot.
She did make lemonade a lot. Why? She would not allow what in the White House? Alcohol. Yeah. So they gave her the nickname Lemonade Lucy because she refused to allow any alcohol in the White House. Guess what President Hayes was also the first president to have in the White House? Think about the time. What first president? No? What'd you say? You both said that? No, something more technological than that.
Radio.
Telephone. He was the first president to use a telephone in the White House. You did a report on it.
Yeah.
Okay, he was the first president to have a telephone in the White House. And thinking about what just went on last weekend, what did his wife Lucy organize for the first time that continues today? Huh? The Easter egg roll at the White House. Yep. Remember they have that big tradition of the Easter egg hunt roll in the White House every year. President Obama just did it. Matter of fact, one of my former students who took my honors U.S. history class was there on the White House lawn. He's a lobbyist for agriculture from Montana. He took his kids to the Easter egg roll on the White House lawn last weekend. So she was the first to start that tradition of what we know now as the Easter egg roll in the White House. Okay, that'll take us to our next subtopic then, is difficulties for President Hayes. Okay, let me ask you a question, see if you can get this, because I talked about this in my class, the other class today. What's the worst thing that can happen to a president after he's elected president? Well, that could be bad, but no. For the normal president, what does the president want when he's elected president? What's he looking for? No. He's looking for support, thank you, or cooperation. How does he get that? Which people? Who's he want the most support and cooperation from?
Rich people.
The Congress, the Senate, and the House. So if he's a Republican president, what's he hoping happens in the elections in the House and the Senate?
That there are Republicans.
That it's a Republican-controlled House and Senate. Unfortunately for Hayes, it was not. The Democrats controlled the House the entire 4 years he was president. And they controlled the Senate 2 of the 4 years he was president. Unfortunately, the last 2.
So it's kind of like what just happened to Obama, because now the Republicans.
Yes, that's exactly right. So Hayes gets into office and he's got a Republican A Republican president's got a Democratic Senate and House. Do they always agree on things?
No.
Very seldom. Now Hayes really, think about how he got the presidency. He wasn't overly popular among his own party even. So he had some trouble. As a matter of fact, Republicans actually split into two different groups after this election because they were upset the way things happened. Two different groups the Republican Party split into. Anybody want to guess what they were?
Stalwart.
The stalwarts and the half-breeds. So the Republican Party actually split, became fragmented after the election of 1876, and there were two parts of the Republican Party. One referred to themselves as stalwarts, and the other one's half-breeds.
Why would they call themselves?
What?
Stalwarts, it's on your ID sheet. Yes.
Why those names?
That's just what they chose. Now, which one of those two opposed President Hayes? Stalwarts. Yeah. The stalwarts. They didn't like him. If somebody's against reform and reformers, what are you against? Let's make it a school thing. If I come in as the principal and I'm a reformer, what am I going to do? Change things. I'm going to reform things and change things in a school. If I'm going to take over as CEO of a hospital, if I'm a reformer, I'm going to go in and change things. Okay, the stalwarts were against reform and reformers. And Hayes was a person that was going to come in and change some things. And they disliked him so much, they gave him the rude nickname Granny Hayes. They called him Granny Hayes. So the stalwarts were very much against Hayes. They were against reform, they were against reformers. And they referred to the president in a very disrespectful way as